Okay. Give a second while they set up so that we can start.
You can start now.
Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, Firoz. Thank you. So, uh, for the last 3 weeks, we have been doing European diaspora. In fact, today we will, after having done the British, French, and the German diaspora, today we come on to the Dutch diaspora. And again, as we go through the European diaspora, we see there is quite a lot of similarities with the Asian and African diaspora in the sense, in terms of segmentation, in terms of diversity. As we have been talking through a lot of classes that diasporas are not homogeneous. We've also looked at the fact that diaspora mobilization happens. It's not a pre-existing condition. Hi, people who are joining. Let me again share my email ID. So, in case you come across something interesting, do share it with each other. Because I am not on WhatsApp, you will have to take the email route with me. My email ID is abhaychavla13@duck.com. I'm also on Telegram and Signal. I'm not on WhatsApp. So keep sharing, interesting items with each other. You can share it with me on my email ID. And as I said, academics and scholarly pursuit does not involve right, wrong, good, bad. These are all points of views. These are perspectives. And as we have seen, the Asian and African nations focus much more on the diaspora, possibly because there is a remittance which is coming in. That remittance for some countries is vast. It's almost tens of percentage of their GDP. That's why their focus on diaspora is more. What we are seeing in the European diaspora is the fact that possibly the remittance is not that big, and that is possibly the reasons these nations or their governments are not focused on diaspora. And we will see the same in sense of the Dutch diaspora that we are talking today. Let me put on the presentation. As I said, the procedure is simple. As I continue with the presentation, if there is something that you wish to share, you can share it. You can stop me at any moment of time. You can share it in the chat. My chat box is open. You can ask me a question. So the idea is that we interact in this rather than it's a monologue that I keep doing. That way we are able to get enriched with various points of views. Okay, without much ado, let's start on the Dutch diaspora. And something similar, a little bit about historical context. In fact, the more one is able to pick up history, the more one is able to get a sense of the present. History also always determines the present. So every time there is a particular problem, or you are trying to resolve a problematic issue, if you go back in history, history will give you a lot of answers to that problem. So, the relationship of, I think I copy pasted. So the German diaspora, the Dutch diaspora with homeland, and the diasporic policies. Defining again, always start with definitions. Does diaspora consist of Dutch and their descendants living outside of Netherlands? Immigration from Netherlands has been occurring since at least the 17th century, and we have seen with the European diaspora, as we saw with the Asian and the African diaspora, migration is the norm. In fact, as I keep repeating, and I'll repeat it again, the story of human beings is a story of migrations. And yet there is this conflict between immigrants and nationhoods. So a lot of nations across the world talk about citizenship as a belonging, and yet predominantly the story of humankind is one of migration. And maybe trace back to the international presence of Dutch Empire, its monopoly on the mercantile shipping. In fact, with the Europeans, one has to understand that the Europeans were the ones who colonized the world. They colonized multiple countries in multiple continents, and that colonization effectively became a bridge between the colonizers and the colonized. So when we were doing the Asian and African diaspora, a lot of the colonized countries, people were migrating to the ones who colonized them. So that bridge was there. And that reverse bridge also happens because once British colonized the whole world in a way, British people from Britain were traveling and staying out there. So let's go back into history. Large part of what is now Netherlands was sea or swamp well into the Middle Ages. So Netherlands does not have a very history which dates much back. Pretty recent that way. It was not until the 16th century that an independent state roughly corresponding to the present day Netherlands was established. We're talking about middle age, 16th century. And this is how Netherlands looked like. This is what Netherlands is. It's surrounded on one side by North Sea, and then there is Belgium and Germany. And we will see that naturally the largest number of Dutch people are staying in Belgium and Germany. And if you notice, the North Sea is pretty much coming inside. If you see, there are this blue, you see all these water bodies out here. So you see this fjords. So pretty much that is why it was a swamp and sea out there. In fact, these countries are also called lowlands because these lands are effectively lower than the sea level. So they have to build embankments to protect the cities from being inundated by the sea. The closing years of 16th century, Dutch entered into what is called the Golden Age, where Dutchmen sailed, and it was the start of the colonial empire. Dutch East India Company was established in 1601. And this was the time in Europe when all these trading companies were established, the East India Trading Company, the French Trading Company, and so on and so forth. And this was the time when India was going through its golden phase. And that is why, and subsequently, as industrialization hit Europe, they wanted raw materials for which they needed to colonize. The Dutch East India Company, established 1601, displaced Portuguese as dominant power in the east. They founded Batavia and Java, expelled Portuguese from Malacca, which is the Malay Strait, and Ceylon, and later in the century established themselves in Sumatra. So almost the Indonesian part. You'll be surprised to know that even after World War II, and so much so that Indonesia had declared its independence, the Dutch maintained control. They refused to allow Indonesia to have its independence. It was only much later that Indonesia was given, the Dutch agreed or acknowledged Indonesian independence, and a lot of Dutch who were settled out there were expelled. So it's a very interesting thing how they moved. In fact, if you notice in the map, there is a province called Zealand. In fact, the country New Zealand gets its name from this. We will see it was the Dutch who first discovered this place, which their cartographers named as Zealand, after the province in Netherlands. And they called it the New Zealand. We'll see that. Indonesia was called the Dutch East Indies, and here the Dutch married native women, created a new group of people, the Dutch Eurasians, also known as the Indos or Indo-Europeans. By 1930, there were 2.5 lakh Europeans or Indo-Europeans in that colony. After the Indonesian national revolution, many chose to leave the country, and about 500,000 Eurasians live in Netherlands. So you see, obviously there was movement, there was migrations, there was intermingling, there was intermarriages. And that is why, again, today, if any one of us across the world was to take a DNA sampling, we would all have a very mixed DNA comprising of various stocks of, people. It was Dutchman Abel Tasman was the first European to sight New Zealand in 1642. He was attacked by the Maoris. Uh, However, it was the cartographers called that place as New Zealand after the Dutch province of Zeeland. The modern migration of Dutch to New Zealand started in the 50s. And these Dutch settlers came from when Indonesia became independent, and there was a revolution out there. Most of the Dutch settlers moved away from the Indonesia into New Zealand. Just a minute. Vishal is not able to hear my voice. Can the other people hear my voice?
Yes.
Vishal, can you just check your connection? Vishal Yadav? Is Vishal Yadav still there? Vishal Yadav has dropped. I think there was a problem with his net. Okay, at any moment of time you're not able to hear a voice, please put it in the chat so that I'm able to see. In fact, when these Dutch travelers were moving to the Dutch East India Company was moving to the east, they stopped at what was called the Cape of Good Hope. Was first settled by Europeans under the auspices of Dutch East India Company. So, in fact, it was a provision station because when the ships were moving from Netherlands into the east, the Cape of Good Hope became a provision stations to provide its outbound fleets with fresh provisions and a harbor of refuge during the lost sea journey. And here, because it was a provision station and a refuge station, the Dutch, and remember, it was the men who were traveling. The Dutch men had children born to slaves in that colony. They established a colony, and majority of the slaves had been imported from East Indies, which is Indonesia, India, Madagascar, and parts of Eastern Africa. So there were these children, and then these children had Dutch ancestry. This resulted in the formation of new ethnic group, the Cape Colored, most of whom adopted the Dutch language and were instrumental in shaping its new regional dialect, the Afrikaans. So if you see how things have moved, and if you recollect, the modern human being was basically evolved in Africa. Initial theories talked about East Africa, but new discoveries have found that modern human being parallelly evolved not only in East Africa, but other parts of Africa. And then this modern human being then traveled across the world. And once it travels across the world, it, has different, evolution traits. And then with the formation of nation states and citizenship, it resulted in a totally different. And then we, determine and we classified people as immigrants, migrants, expats, etc., etc. So these were Cape Colored and a regional dialect, Afrikaans. In fact, the most rural sections of the Afrikaner community, known as the Boers, undertook the Great Trap South and formed the Ottoman. And this was done when the British came into Africa. British then became a dominant power. When British became a dominant power, there was this conflict between Britain and Dutch. And then these sections of Afrikaner community came down and formed the autonomous Boer republics, the Transvaal republics, and the Orange. What we saw in the movie Gandhi, or what we know about apartheid in South Africa, were basically these Boers. The Boer Republic encouraged immigrants from Netherlands, were valued for their education, and these Boers were the ruling class in South Africa, where there was apartheid for a very long time, and then subsequently things changed.
So the Boers themselves were
Colored.
like mixed race, right?
Yes, they were colored between Dutch and the
They
natives,
they practiced apartheid.
and they practiced apartheid.
Okay.
And but again, if you notice, Jews were the most persecuted in Europe. Jews across Europe was most persecuted. In fact, I did mention earlier about this video, this interview between Piers Morgan and Bassem Youssef, an Egyptian stand-up comedian, who brought out the history of Jews. In fact, the first crusade, which was launched in 11th century, 1092 or something, where the Christians were mobilized to go and free the the birthplace of Christ, which is Jerusalem. The Christians mobilized in Europe, and rather than going and they said, why go so far to kill the non-believers? The Christians considered Jews as non-believers. So you can Google that and see what actually happened in the first crusade. And so here was this community, the Jews, which was persecuted heavily in Europe. And then it was Europe's problem to set up Israel in the state of Palestine. And now the Jews are persecuting the next community. So it's again, if you see history, if you see human history and world history, sometimes there is a series on the India-Pakistan partition called the Tamas. I don't know whether you have seen it or not, or anybody has seen it.
Can you just write it in the comments box so we can
it's called
later?
it's called Tamas.
And yeah, I've seen it, so Bhishma Sahani.
Vishnu Sahani, absolutely, absolutely. And they the series, the episodes start with a quote which says, "Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it." And interestingly, if you notice, more often than not, human beings work in a very circular way. We tend to do the same thing over and over again. As we have said, human beings have found out of two world wars, World War I and World War II, where millions of people lost their lives, that wars are not a solution to a problem. And yet, look at us in the 21st century, where on one hand, we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about global connectivity, we're talking about internet. There are active wars going on throughout the world. Let's not worry about the right, wrong, good, bad. But we have understood over history that wars is never a solution to a problem. And yet, actively, wars are happening. So that's besides the point. So again, all these, as I said, all these, history lessons that we do as a part of this migration and diaspora studies tends to get a better perspective as to how things happened and why they happened. So this Boer Republic encouraged migration from Netherlands, and they practiced apartheid, which was dismantled. In 1621, while in 1601, the East India Company, in 1621, the Dutch West India Company was founded. In fact, 1626, they bought Manhattan Island from Native Americans and founded there the settlement of New Amsterdam, what is today New York. The colony spread into surrounding districts of what is New York State, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Delaware. In Delaware, the Dutch came into conflict with the Swedish settlement. By 1655, the whole areas were controlled by the Dutch. Yeah, and if you remember, when we were studying, the French had a settlement in Canada, and they lost this war to Britain. That settlement went over to Britain, and they were left with Quebec as a province. So a lot of times when we are studying Indian history and we look at kingdoms and princes and the wars between them and the trading of territory, the same thing was happening in Europe. The same thing happens in Africa, in America. Things were happening. So world over, the human history somewhere is you will say it's like a deja vu. You've almost kind of seen it all. Dutch migrant settlers in search of a better life started arriving in Suriname, previously known as Dutch Guyana, in 19th century. And here with Boeros, not to be confused with South African Boeren, farmers arriving from the Dutch province of Gelderland and Groningen. I don't know how to pronounce it. So they were given different names. Most of these Dutch settlers left Suriname after independence in Suriname got independence in 75. Interestingly, if you Google right now the Kingdom of Netherlands, you will find the Kingdom of Netherlands not only includes Netherlands, but a couple of islands in the Caribbean still. Furthermore, the Suriname ethnic group Creoles, persons of mixed African-European ancestry, are partial of Dutch descent. So inevitably, all these people went there, mixed around, had children, and those children, kind of had the descent of, they took part of the European descent. Most popular destination. So where do the immigrants go? The immigrants today for Dutch, Belgium and Germany head the list, followed by Spain, United Kingdom, United States of America. Other popular destinations are France, Australia, and Turkey. 1/3 of this with second generation migrants, which means they are departed. 1/3 of these immigrants are Dutch nationals with a second generation migration. So inevitably, these people came to Netherlands and then they are migrating back. They are departing for the country of birth of their parents. So inevitably, it's quite possible that possibly one of the Afrikaners or the Eurasians, they would be getting out of Netherlands after having stayed out there. So this is what the immigrant is. While total emigration keeps on increasing, emigration of people born in Netherlands has been declining for a number of years, buckling this trend. And that there also, there is an economic reason. And if you notice again, we always kind of, the narrative bit seems to be that it's the Asia and the Africa, because global South being underdeveloped, being poor, are moving on to the global North, which is developed. The global North also has poverty, has opportunity problem, has an aspirational thing where the people from the global North also keep moving. They either keep moving northward itself laterally, or they move south. Australian, so over 65 from Dutch head more than average for Southern European countries, especially Spain and France, to enjoy a retirement. So obviously, retirement means these Spain and France are relatively cheaper than Netherlands. Australia and United Kingdom are popular among people in their 20s to take a year off or go for a study program. So something very similar we see, though our concept of retirement in let's say in Asia and Africa would be to stay here, but out there things become expensive as you retire, and then they possibly try. Even with the British diaspora, we saw a lot of people moved out of Britain for retirement. While the Netherlands can be primarily typified as a typical reluctant country of immigration, preoccupied with managing immigration and immigrant integration, immigration has always been an important and somewhat neglected component of Dutch migration history. And more often not, whenever we hear the word migrant, we always look at it as an Asian or African or South American. Possibly this is, the global North and the global South divide. and the way the media, stereotypes migrants. So the first decades following World War II were characterized by high level of emigration and active interference by Dutch government. This also had an economic reason to it. More often than not, one of the ways of understanding, besides history, even in history, economic becomes a very important way of understanding things. So the Netherlands experienced a surplus of farmers after the Second World War due to the destruction of its dikes by German forces, unworkable land, and unemployment. Much of the country's agricultural land was flooded. So what the Dutch government did was to encourage emigration. Again, repeating what I keep saying earlier, we cannot try and equate the European experience or the European countries or European immigration to Asian or African experience, because Asian and African countries are bigger, their populations are much more larger and diverse. European countries are smaller, their populations are smaller. According to Van Dalen and Henkins, this belief that Netherlands was overcrowded and faced a prospect of permanent employment led to a period of government-induced planned migration. Active immigration policies of the Dutch government caused an exodus of native-born Dutch to Canada, Australia, and United States. So that's how this immigration happened. In the 50s, about 125,000 Dutch immigrants settled in Canada, 100,000 in Australia, and 50,000. See, look at the numbers that we are talking about. When we compare these countries to, the Asian and African countries, the number disparity is huge. Research showed that at that time, social aftercare for native-born immigrants was not seen as a Dutch responsibility. Social aftercare for native-born immigrants were not seen as a Dutch responsibility by the Dutch government. In fact, Dutch carried on, and still the Dutch government holds no responsibility for immigrants, even for their diasporas. Simultaneously, relaxation and Canadian immigration restriction made the country attractive. Shortage of labor in farm, logging, construction got people to move to Canada. However, after an economic recession in 1957 and reports of winter unemployment rising in prosperity in Netherlands, the incentive to emigrate to Canada diminished. So you see how the economic has a major role to play in terms of migration. And that's one of the possible reasons why there's a lot of people migrating from the global south into global north. Then the relative attractiveness of Australia and New Zealand as destination countries for the Dutch emerged when the Australian government deliberately set about attracting immigrants. In fact, the post-war Dutch settlers in Australia are held as an exemplar of the success of Australian assimilation. In fact, the Dutch diaspora in Australia is almost known as the invisible immigrants. And how they organize themselves into groups based on religion or socioeconomic status. Dutch government facilitated the process. And they had Dutch immigration officials were there in Australia, and they were given financial assistance, all aimed to help the Dutch settle quickly. The government itself was wanting Dutchmen to go out. Yes.
But why did the Dutch government want their citizens
Aisha, tell me.
Why did the Dutch government actively
Aisha?
want their citizens to leave? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Aisha, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Aisha, can you hear me? Okay. Aisha has
both. I can hear both of you.
raised a hand and disappeared.
Hello, Abhay. Abhay.
Aisha, can you hear me?
No, Abhay, your I think your network is problem.
Can the rest of the people hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, we can hear you.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Guys, can you hear me?
Sir, can you hear us? Sir, can you hear us?
Guys, can you hear me?
Sir, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Aisha, yes, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Tell me.
Okay, I was asking, why would the Dutch government want their own citizens to leave the country and go settle somewhere else?
Aisha, if you, I think you missed out the earlier slide. Post-war, post World War II, because the Germans had destroyed the dikes, because these Netherlands is lowlands. They are below sea level. So there are these dikes which are made, which prevents the sea from coming inside. And when the Dutch had destroyed them, the agricultural lands got flooded by the seawater. And because agriculture being the main stay, and the farmers could not work, so inevitably the Dutch wanted those people to emigrate so that the pressure of employment reduced. Aisha?
Okay. But they would not be remitting any money or anything, right?
But what they did was they actually they helped. Hang on. Somebody's mic got remained on. Okay. In fact, actually, the Dutch government, for example, in Australia, the consular support was giving them financial aid to settle down. They actively promoted this emigration. Asha?
Okay, even without anything in return, like they would just get the pressure taken off. That's it, right?
Correct. See, at the end of the day, you have to understand that the role of the state is the welfare of its citizens. The role of a modern state is the welfare of its citizens. So if there is a problem, that problem needs to be solved out. And again, because these are smaller countries with smaller populations, sorting out a problem is much easier than what it would be in case of a country in Asia, Africa, or South America. These are bigger countries with bigger populations. You can't expect India to have this planned immigration and all this stuff, because the number of people are huge.
True, yeah.
So the Dutch government facilitated the process of settlement and assimilation, which helped with employment, transport to employment in distant location, and finance assistance. Smaller countries, smaller number of people, it's always much easier to handle that. Aisha?
Got it. And by this time, Australia had was like completely colonized and everything, and right?
See, Australia inevitably had Europeans coming in. In fact, if you see, there were all these Europeans who had come in, who had taken over the native population. In fact, the native population was colonized by these Europeans. And then today, Australia is supposed to be a white country. But the fact is, there are these natives.
Yeah, true.
Okay. So
Yes.
in fact, the Dutch migrants offered an example of a workable model of religious intergroup relations. They experienced a system called verzuiling, a set of norms governing the relationship among religious groups and communities. Remember, these are smaller populations, much more closely, interacting with each other. And the religious group organized themselves into parallel communities of Catholic, Protestants, Socialists, Liberals, which served to maintain and enable religious differences. So the Dutch were able to assimilate very well in the Australian system. That's what they are saying. In fact, they even led to a new religious group in Australia, the Reformed churches, setting up of de facto Dutch Catholic parishes in Melbourne and Sydney, and swelling the ranks of those who declared no religion in Australian census. So, again, every time something happens, it leads to something else. And we have seen, hang on, somebody is kindly subscribed to, okay. MA Migration and Diaspora is giving a message. Kindly subscribe to the YouTube channel of this program. All these programs are live streamed and you can see them later. Again, as I said, in case you are a new student, you can always request me for a presentation by sending me an email. I'm sharing my email ID. It's abhaychavla13@duck.com. I'm not on WhatsApp, so I cannot join your WhatsApp groups. I'm on Telegram and Signal in case somebody wants to get in touch with me. But in case you need the presentation, and more often than not, most of my presentations, the larger framework is the same as the course material that you have got, but I do take liberties in adding a lot more. And I've tried to make a template in which a lot of history comes in for you to get to understand, how whatever it is, how did this happen? How did we get here? So due to pressures to assimilate and desire to make success of the new lives, the heritage of Dutch community was considered as unimportant by many within the community. And then they became what was called the invisible migrant. That implied the Dutch have merged into the Australian society without levying entries. I do not know presently if, as we are seeing worldwide with the availability of new media and social media is a part of new media, whether these invisible migrants have again started expressing their Dutch identity and have come out of their invisibleness. Because we have also seen today with social media, what happens in homeland is affecting the diasporas in hostland. In fact, there's a lot of convergence which is happening. So that is a new part of modern diaspora. There is a certain amount of everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be, there is this conflict between migration and nationhood, between host and home, and all these things. So I don't know if there is any latest research which says whether they are still invisible or they have come out of their invisibility. After the post-war migration and throughout the 70s, the flow of immigrants from Netherlands did not cease altogether, but remained low. The reasons for the end of the post-war Dutch migration wave was predominantly economic. As I said, again, another way to understand migration is economic. The Dutch economy was doing well and the Dutch government had ceased to actively promote immigration as unemployment and shortage of houses were no longer a problem. This is the 2011 study. Now, between 2011 and 2023, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. Earlier, the immigrants were typically from average to lower income groups, were usually skilled or semi-skilled. Today, they are typically highly mobile professionals or academicians and travel on independent skill visa. And what we today, a new category of diasporas is the digital diaspora. These are the highly skilled people who are traveling, who are connecting, who are mobilizing, because they can work from anywhere. The Dutch diaspora of recent times refer to Dutch-born immigrants and their descendants, as well as others who identify with Dutch ethnicity, such as spouses of Dutch-born immigrants. These well-settled and largely economic successfully and their upward mobile second-generation children, along with post-70s and the new transnational migrants, contribute to a vibrant Dutch diaspora. Again, we do use the term of diaspora, but technically they would not be diaspora in the traditional sense of the Asian and African diaspora that we have read about. That mobilization is not as effective as the Asian and the African. So let's look at the diaspora infrastructure. In Netherlands, consular matters fall under the responsibility of Consular Affairs and Visa Policy, DCV, which is one of the clusters of foreign policy areas or theme installed and directly by Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Worldwide, the Kingdom of Netherlands. That's why I said if you Google Kingdom of Netherlands, Aruba, Curacao, and Saint Martin are islands in the Caribbean, which come under the Kingdom of Netherlands. They are independent countries, but their defense and foreign policy is looked after by Netherlands. Even today, these were typically colonized places during the Dutch West Indian or the West Indian Company, 1621. They are still they fall under the Kingdom of Netherlands, and they hold approximately 140 diplomatic posts. There is no institution separate from ministries dedicated to address the needs of Dutch nationals abroad. Nor do exist officially recognized representative or consultative institution by which Dutch citizen can be represented or through which Dutch national can address their questions of interest. So essentially, if you're out of Netherlands, you're on your own. However, there is, like what we had seen in the German case, the consular had discretionary power. In the case of Dutch, even Dutch political parties have no departments within their organization that are dedicated to dealing with Dutch nationals abroad. So there is none. This is the extreme case. It does not offer country-specific policy for national abroad. Neither does Ministry of Foreign Affairs or DCV any diaspora policy specifically targeting Dutch nationals. Only for Dutch nationals living and working in Germany and Belgium, there's a website. That's all. So essentially, there is hardly any of the diaspora infrastructure. Serves as a safety net for Dutch interests abroad, first point of contact for nationals of other countries wanting to come to Netherlands. The Dutch legal order does not recognize any right to either consular assistance or diplomatic protection. So once you step out of Netherlands, you're on your own. Moreover, the Dutch government considers that consular assistance is a matter of tailored service. So there is a certain amount of discretion which comes out there. If there is an emergency and the Dutch government feels that they need to step in, they would. Have no obligations to assist Dutch nationals residing abroad. You're on your own. This is the extreme case. Sorry.
Sorry. So, I mean, this must be amongst very few countries who have this kind of policy towards its citizens, right? Because
Aisha, if you see, we when we were doing Germany also, the Germans were pretty much leaving it to the consular staff in terms of discretion. What we saw with the government was actively out to reach out to the diasporas, but the diaspora mobilization was not there. So if you've seen all 4 diasporas of European countries, more often than not, that mobilization is not there. One of the possibilities is the fact that because these countries had colonized the rest of the world, there was this reverse bridge which was formed. So today, if a Britisher comes to India, there is a certain amount of, link which has already been there in terms of familiarity. And again, as I said, European countries and populations are much smaller. So when Indians are there are, that percentage is higher. When Europeans go out, that percentage in terms of actual numbers is much lower. So why? Yeah, Aisha.
If the numbers are lower, then I think they should be more inclined to help them, right? Because
maybe again, the fact is, listen, at the end of the day, still, if you notice, even in India, after all that, we talk about colonization and throwing off the colonization yoke, we are still very extremely enamored of the West. The West is the yardstick. And that
True.
would happen in most of the countries in the global south. That colonization, years of colonization did this change. So still for some reason, when the global south people are traveling north, it's more like and if you see the media narration, the difference between a migrant and an expat, what's the difference, Aisha?
The race, probably the skin color.
That's the only difference. But we tend to, the media tends to, we tend to internalize all these things. So we almost tend to feel that the problem, but that's how the ideological component of colonization was there, to get the global south or the colonized to feel inferior to the colonizer. That's how it worked out. But that's the way things are. So I guess, again, what are the reasons, why that mobilization? The mobilization has to happen for some reason. For example, when the global south person is going, and there are many more such people, and there is an insecurity, that insecurity gets them to come together, that mobilization happens. Aisha?
Yes, so that means that like if the Dutch community had a larger presence in a different country, then
Or
you're saying that they would be more.
or they would feel or they would be made to feel insecure,
Okay.
because mobilization has to happen for some reason. It is not a pre-existing condition that you migrate, and so one of the perspective is, it's not a pre-existing condition that as soon as you migrate, you come together.
Right.
Diaspora is a mobilization. That's one of the perspectives.
Okay. I felt like it should be a given, that if you are a citizen of a country and then you migrate and you're still a citizen, so the country should,
Okay, so
have
let's perfectly fine.
yeah.
So let's look at that. Aisha, which part of the country are you from?
Mumbai.
Mumbai. Now, inevitably, if you are from Mumbai and you have a Marathi culture, and you migrate to the US and you come across a person from, let's say, Northeast, what would there be common between you people, other than that you both are from India?
Not
Nothing.
much, maybe skin
Nothing.
color.
Nothing. So there has to be something which will get you to come together, to mobilize, to talk to each other, to organize.
But it should just be offered by the government, I feel.
How would the governments do it? Because, for example, inevitably, how much would forget today, initially when even during the indentured labor, when they were going, or later when the migrants were going, how the initial thought process was the fact that once you step out of the country, then you should be a part of the host country. You should forget your homeland. It's only now, because of global connectivity, internet, media connections, and a smaller world and globalization, is there a connection between the homeland and the host land? So during the absence of media, when the first indentured labor or the slaves were taken, they carried a part of their culture, and diaspora studies came from there only, this faint tendency to remember the homeland and wanting to come back.
Right.
But today, when you look at it, that remembrance of the home country is 24/7. There are messaging apps, there is YouTube, there is connection, there is news. And most of the migrants subsequently are not forced. They willingly go for better deal.
Correct.
So why would you mobilize? So possibly it's also possible that you're going for a better deal. You want to assimilate into a new culture. However, there are multiple things at play.
But you still have rights, because as a citizen of the country, you still have rights.
So
right? Whenever you
inevitably,
go back.
Correct. No, but the point is, in a lot of countries, once you move out, you have to. There is no concept of dual citizenship in a lot of countries. In fact, we will see with the Dutch also, there was a proposal to finish dual citizenship. Dutch follow dual citizenships, but there was a proposal to halt dual citizenship because they said once you leave the country, then you should either take one citizenship or another citizenship. But today, again, there is another thought process which says, what's the problem in a host and a homeland? There are these connections. There is a sense of globalization. There is this fight which is going on between citizenship and active migration, because the history of humankind is a story of migration.
Correct.
So if you see, there is this conflict which is happening in multiple topics. There is this conflict between religion and science. And
Right.
there is a negotiation going on somewhere in the middle ground. Similarly, there is this fight between migration and citizenship. There is a negotiation going on. So now, when a lot of countries are talking about allowing voting for non-resident people or for people who have migrated, well, it's a very gray area. Because if there are more people outside who start influencing national elections for people who are inside, it's kind of crazy.
Yes, definitely.
For example, today, when a non-resident Indian starts commenting about what Indians should do and what Indians should not do, the non-resident Indian might be the one who migrated in the 60s. India has changed.
Yeah,
And their sense of India is the 60s India.
correct.
So this is going to be a negotiation. And see, again, we are not looking at the negotiation part. We are looking at the academic and the scholarly part to see how it works about and how, the polity of the system, the polity of the nation, the polity of the diaspora, how they influence, what are the negotiations, what it works about. The diasporic studies itself has changed a lot.
What about emergency situations? Like you always see countries rushing to kind of support their citizens, like
So
whether it's a war
in Dutch also, they say that it's not a legal right, but it's on a case-to-case basis. So we'll see. If you Google there was an emergency situation where the Dutch government came to help.
Okay.
As do all governments. So when the Ukraine-Russian war broke
Exactly.
out, the Indian government stepped in to get their nationals back, which every government does it, because it does affect the polity. Remember, politics drives.
Right. True.
Okay.
True.
Informal, let's carry on. Informal interviews. DCV is primarily concerned with provisions of basic information and service. They have an online portal. There is a Twitter handle. Except for citizens residing in Aruba, Curacao, and Sint Maarten, Dutch citizens living abroad are allowed to vote. So they have a dual voting system. They are allowed to run as candidates for upper and lower house. They cannot vote for the provisional and municipal elections, but they can stand as candidates with the provision that if they win, they intend to come back. So that is how, again, as I said, all these things are much easier done because these are smaller countries, smaller populations, and not as diverse as as Asian and African countries. Asian and African countries are huge with populations, size, and diversity. So no official policy for repatriation to Netherlands, consular service and set down. Consular assistant is based on policy and not a legal right. Netherlands is under no legal obligation to provide consular assistance. We provide on a rational person, that is by reason by a person concerned. So there's a discretionary part. Dutch education abroad, although not a part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Online portals refers to foundation. So they do provide education to Dutch-speaking children around the world, not as organized as British, French, or German. Engaging with the ministry, not implemented any policy, provides financial incentive to there is no policy in terms of providing financial incentive, encouraging the return, facilitates to provide incentives or send remittances, provide incentives to invest or create productive assets. What we saw, which is kind of totally opposite to what Asia and Africa does. They encourage return. Africa is actively encouraging return, incentives to send remittances, incentivized to invest and create. Asia and Africa was doing it. Dutch didn't. The Europeans don't care that way. This was an interesting example. In 2011, the Dutch government expressed a wish to restrict dual citizenship. There was an outburst. Any Dutch national who acquired a citizenship of another country would lose Dutch citizenship. However, there was a pushback. For the Dutch diaspora, there was a successful lobby of Dutch immigrants community. Now, here there was a mobilization which happened. They were successfully able to mobilize and lobby with the Dutch government, and this episode shows significant political clout of the Dutch diaspora in dual citizenship legislation. Because also the Dutch diaspora votes in the upper and the lower house and has its representatives, that makes the difference. What we saw in German diaspora too, and French diaspora too. So let's sum up. We discussed migration history of Dutch, what we constitute as Dutch diaspora, infrastructure and key engagement, and rather than actively provide its national abroad with assistance, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs conceives of itself mainly as a facilitator that provides consular assistance in case of emergency or on an ad hoc basis. In fact, next time when we see Italian diaspora, we'll see how Italy sums up, and then in the next one we will finish with the Portuguese and the Spanish diaspora. So some references and suggestions, rest are there in your course material. The invisible immigrants, Dutch migrants in South Australia. Again, these are 2011. There is a whole lot of things which have shifted since 2011. The world has changed. Because remember, social media came in 2005, 2006. Subsequently, there's a lot of changes which have happened because of new media, because of the way things are moving. So that is there. Okay. Any questions? Let me switch on my video. Hi. Any questions? We are very much on time. Kindly subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a YouTube channel. It's there in the chat box. In case you have not seen, I will copy and paste again. So that kindly subscribe to this channel. As I said, you come across anything interesting, keep sharing in your groups. And you can email me at abhaychavla13@duck.com. And because I'm not there on WhatsApp, but I will share my number. I'm there on Telegram and Signal in case you would like to connect with me. That's my Telegram and Signal number, so you can connect with me. Any questions?
I had one question.
Yes, Aisha.
So, we've seen how the Dutch people have settled at that time at various places, for example, like Indonesia and other places. But we don't find a large Dutch-speaking population in any of these countries that they colonized, right?
Indonesia, they were turned out. They are still there in these 3 Caribbean islands, which they are there. Dutch people are still, the boards are still there in South Africa, part of it. And a lot of them then went back to Netherlands also, na?
Okay. So they were not that successful at colonizing.
It's not such a big country too, na? The population,
Yeah.
look at the number of people.
Yeah, even I mean, Britain was not a large country, and then
Correct.
they
But
colonized
again,
like half the world.
but again, remember, Britain was able to colonize India, for example, by the
Yeah.
help of the, various Indian princes who were at war with each other.
Yeah,
They were able to
true.
divide and rule.
Yeah, true.
which is what most of the European powers were doing.
But we see some influence of like the Portuguese, we see influences of British, but not so much Dutch, right?
India, possibly not, but in other places they would be.
Okay.
You would, I am sure you would see that in Indonesia, you will see that in Sumatra.
Hello, I would like to add
Dev.
that the Dutch is an official language in Belgium, in Suriname. Yes. So because I've studied in the Netherlands and I've worked in Belgium, so I know
Wonderful.
about it.
So Aisha, that's Dev Pragya. Value adding for you. So Suriname, they were there. Suriname, Dutch would have definitely see wherever the colonizers were there, they would have definitely influenced the culture.
Yeah.
And also, I was also very amazed about Belgium because there is a constant fight between the Dutch speaking people and the French speaking people. They have their own areas. And it's weird. It's also like, the people of the African descent, they speak a lot of French, and the white people speak a lot of Dutch. So yeah, it is very interesting in Europe.
So inevitably, if you see it in another way, the colonization time, the time of industrialization or industrial revolution, when these European powers competed for colonies, they might not compete for colonies in that sense of the word, but they're still competing for resources, and the same competitions are there. So when we look at Asian countries competing with each other, when we look at African countries competing with it's the same thing with Europe. So in some way, there is a certain amount of continuity with the whole world. Thanks, Dev Pragya. Aisha?
Yes, I got it.
Okay. Any other question?
Hi, sir.
Hi, Veera. How are you?
Yeah, fine, sir.
Okay.
What about you?
I'm very well. How's the mother and the baby doing?
Yeah, both are good, sir.
Okay. Veera has just become a proud father. So,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Veera, ask me.
Yeah, coming to this one, when compared to remaining countries from Europe, this is entirely different. Dutch diaspora, their policies. Generally, every government, that means Netherlands government, generally every country, that means every government will give only economic benefits instead of political benefits. Here, this country is giving political benefits instead of economic benefits. Is it correct?
So, sir, if you remember when we saw German diaspora and French diaspora, even the British diaspora, there were no financial incentives that were being given per se. There was nothing which said that they were encouraging German nationals or British nationals or French nationals to come and invest. There was nothing in terms of helping them with remittances. There was no word on that. In fact, I did some amount of search. I didn't come across these words specifically. What we would come across, across Asian diasporas, African diasporas, where the country wants remittances. Nepal, for example, has 25% of its GDP coming out of remittances. So inevitably, that's also the difference between the global South and the global North, the developed and the underdeveloped.
Yes. Yeah. Second thing, sir, this is not for only this Dutch diaspora or European diaspora. Generally, I think this dual citizenship is the very not proper thing for assimilation to the assimilation process. If you give this kind of dual citizenship any countries, that assimilation towards that host country is very toughest thing.
See, again, Veera, you have to look at it from two ways. The diaspora, we always looked at it from 2 points of view: assimilation or integration. For example, the Indian model is more of integration rather than assimilation. The US model was from assimilation. Integration in the longer run works better in the sense that each community holds on to its own culture and still becomes a part of the larger whole. Whereas Americans want everybody to assimilate into the American culture. But then we also saw there was this news article about what we shared in New York Times about this Chinese girl who is an American but does not feel American. So, somewhere down the line, these are all contradictions which has to be negotiated. Which is better or which is worse, you cannot say. More often than not, in a longer term, integration works better because for a simple reason, you're not pushing an immigrant to assimilate their culture into your culture, because somewhere down the line, you would still hold on to your culture. It's something like, remember when I started this course and I started these units, I started with this example of a girl and the traditional Indian household. The girl gets married and moves to the boy's household. Now, once she gets married and moves to the boy's household, more often than not, it's a household rather than create a new household. Does the girl forget everything that happened in her home and do everything which happens in the host place? That means the boys, that cannot happen. So inevitably, the tensions will come in. Whereas if you allow that integration, there is a sense of belonging. At the same time, each one is able to hold on to their beliefs. So, but again, sorry, tell me, Vida.
I'm telling, I can understand that one. That means sense of belongingness regarding the culture, their previous history, all these things. If you come to the rules and jurisdiction and laws, if one person have dual citizenship, he did one mistake or unfortunately it happened, what kind of jurisdiction he will get? What kind of laws imposed in him? To protect as well as whatever we want to give the punishment, then how government will think?
No, but Veera, again, the point is that dual citizenship has nothing to do with. So if a Dutch national, in spite of having a dual citizenship, is residing, let's say in the US, the US laws will apply. The Dutch laws will not apply.
Okay, based on their host country.
Correct, obviously. So if an American is in India and he commits a felony, it will be the Indian laws which will apply.
Okay.
The American might have diplomatic, consular access, but the law of India will apply. So the host land will always apply. Look at what happens to the 7 Navy personnel in Qatar.
Oh, yes, sir.
They have been given death penalty by Qatar.
Yes, sir. But still, I don't know. In Middle East, what is the naturalization process?
Middle East, there is no naturalization process. You cannot get a citizenship.
Okay. That is the thing.
So you might stay out there.
Okay, outsiders only.
You will be an outsider.
Okay. Yeah, understood.
Okay,
sir.
Ganga, you wanted to ask. Ganga? Ganga, are you there? Ganga, are you there? Ganga has left, I think. Can anybody reach out to Ganga? Or okay, in which case, I'm sorry, Ganga is, I think, kind of occupied somewhere else. Maybe she or he. Is it a she or a he? Does anybody know? Hello?
No idea.
Okay. Nevertheless, if anybody gets across to him or her, whatever, can write me an email. So we'll close the day. You have a nice weekend. We'll meet each other next Saturday at 3 o'clock with the Italian diaspora. Laws of place of occurrence of crime is applicable. Absolutely, Ganga. That's what I was saying. The place where the crime happens, the laws of that place will apply, in spite of the fact whether you have a single citizenship or a dual or a multiple citizenship. Okay. Have a nice weekend. Great to meet you guys and see you next Saturday. Bye-bye.